This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. My name is Jake Carter. I'm 18, a senior in high school, living in a small suburban town where everyone knows everyone else's business. I'm the kind of guy who blends into the background, tall enough, brown hair, decent at school, pretty good at football, but I've spent my whole life feeling like a ghost in my own house. I've got a younger sister, Emily, who's 17 and was born with a physical disability that keeps her in a wheelchair most of the time. She's the sun my family orbits around, and I'm just a shadow trailing behind. My parents, Tom and Laura, love us both. I know that, but Emily's needs always come first. Doctor's appointments, therapy sessions, special outings. Me? I'm the easy kid, the one who doesn't need much, or so they think. I've gotten used to it mostly. But sometimes, the weight of being invisible crushes me. Here's the thing that broke me. It was my 18th birthday, a day I'd been quietly hoping might finally be mine. I woke up early, heart pounding with a flicker of excitement, picturing a cake or even just a happy birthday Jake from my parents. Instead, I stumbled into the kitchen to find Mom on the phone, her voice tight, arranging Emily's latest therapy session. Dad was packing a bag. Emily had a concert she'd been dying to see, some pop star she adored. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, waiting for someone to notice me. No one did. "We'll be back late, Jake," Dad said, barely glancing my way as they wheeled Emily out the door. The house went silent, and I felt this hot, choking lump rise in my throat. I wasn't mad, not yet, just hollowed out, like I'd been scooped empty. I grabbed my backpack and headed to school, figuring I'd bury the hurt there. At school, my best friend Maggie Dawson caught me off guard. She's this fireball of a girl, short blonde hair, always wearing these loud graphic tees, and a grin that could light up a blackout. She saw me slumping into homeroom and narrowed her eyes. "What's wrong with you, Carter? You look like someone kicked your dog." I shrugged, not wanting to spill it, but she's relentless. "It's my birthday," I muttered, staring at my desk. Her jaw dropped. "And your folks didn't do anything?" I shook my head, and she grabbed my arm, dragging me out of class before the bell even rang. "Screw that. We're fixing this." By lunch, Maggie had rounded up a few friends, kids from the football team, some band geeks she knew, and they'd pooled cash for ice cream from the cafeteria. We sat under the bleachers, licking chocolate cones, and they sang Happy Birthday so loud it echoed off the metal. I laughed, the sound surprising me, but it didn't fill the hole. Maggie leaned in, her voice softer now. "You deserve better than being forgotten, Jake. Don't let them make you think you don't." Her words stuck with me, sharp and warm at the same time, like a pinprick of light in the dark. That night, I got home to a quiet house. Mom and Dad stumbled in late, buzzing about Emily's concert, how she'd smiled the whole time, how the singer waved at her. I sat on the couch, half listening, my chest tight. "Did you have a good day, Jake?" Mom asked absently, already heading upstairs. I nodded, even though she wasn't looking. I went to my room, shut the door, and stared at the ceiling, the silence pressing down like a weight. That was when I decided I couldn't keep living like this, hoping for scraps of attention that never came. The next few weeks were a blur of the same old routine. Emily's needs dominated everything. If she had a rough day, we all stayed home. If she needed a doctor, plans got canceled. I'd always been the one to adapt, staying with Aunt Linda or a neighbor when I was little, missing family trips because Emily couldn't go. I got it, logically. She didn't ask to be sick. But logic didn't stop the ache when I'd hear them laughing in her room while I sat alone, or when Dad would promise, "Next time, Jake," and next time never happened. School became my escape. I'd always been decent at football, but this year, Coach Riley, big guy, gruff voice, looks like he could bench press a truck, started paying attention. "You've got something, Carter," he said after practice one day, clapping me on the shoulder. "Speed, grit. Ever think about going all state?" I hadn't, not really, but his words lit a spark. Football wasn't just a game anymore, it was a way out. I started pushing harder, staying late to run drills, and Coach noticed. He'd yell pointers from the sidelines, his voice cutting through the sweat and exhaustion, and for once, I felt seen. Then came the day I scored my first touchdown. It was a home game, the stands packed, the air electric with cheers. I caught a long pass, dodged 2 defenders, and sprinted across the goal line. The crowd roared, my teammates mobbed me, and for a second, I felt invincible. My chest heaved, Sweat stung my eyes, and I could still hear the whistle echoing in my ears as I stood there, soaking it in. I glanced at the bleachers, hoping, stupidly, that Mom and Dad might have shown up. I pictured them there, Dad clapping with that rare grin of his, Mom waving like she used to when I was a kid. But the seats I'd saved in my mind were empty. They hadn't come. The high crashed, leaving a dull ache in its place. I called them later, still buzzing, my voice shaky with leftover adrenaline. "I scored, Mom. First time." Her reply came through the static, distracted, clipped. "That's great, honey. Emily's running a fever, though. We're at the hospital." The line went quiet, and I hung up, the thrill draining out of me like water through a sieve. I stood in my room, staring at the phone, the silence louder than the crowd had been. Maggie was waiting outside the locker room when I finally shuffled out, my cleats dragging on the pavement. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her bright red hoodie a splash of color against the gray evening. "They didn't come, did they?" she said, her voice sharp with knowing. I didn't answer, just shook my head, and she kicked the ground hard enough to send a pebble skittering. "That's bullshit, Jake. You were a freaking hero out there, and they can't even—" She cut herself off, seeing the way my shoulders slumped. She softened, stepping closer. "I'm proud of you. We all are." Her words were a lifeline, and I clung to them, even if they couldn't erase the sting. Coach Riley caught me before I left the field that night. He's a mountain of a man, broad shoulders, graying buzz cut, voice like gravel, but his eyes were steady when he looked at me. "You did good, Carter," he said, clapping a heavy hand on my back. "That's the kind of fire I've been waiting to see. Keep it up, and you're looking at all state." I nodded, a flicker of pride sparking back to life. "Thanks, Coach," I mumbled, and he gave me a look, like he saw more than I let on. "You're tougher than you think, kid. Don't forget that." I walked away, his words rattling around in my head, a quiet promise I wasn't sure I believed yet. At home, things kept spiraling. Emily's fever turned into a week-long ordeal. More tests, more worry, more of Mom and Dad disappearing into her orbit. I'd hear them through the walls at night, their voices low and tense, planning her next appointment. I'd sit at the kitchen table with my homework, the house feeling like a museum I wasn't part of, everything preserved for Emily, nothing left for me. I started staying late at school, running drills with Coach or hanging out with Maggie, anything to avoid that emptiness. One day, I met Sofia Ramirez in the library. She's new this year, transferred from some city I can't pronounce, with dark hair that falls in waves and a quiet way about her that makes you listen when she talks. We were paired up for a history project, something about the Civil War, and she noticed my doodles of football plays in the margins. "You're on the team, right?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. I nodded, surprised she knew. "Saw you score last week. You were fast." I blinked, caught off guard. Thanks. You were there?" She smiled, small and shy. "Yeah, my brother dragged me. He's obsessed with sports." We clicked after that, trading notes and stories, and I found myself looking forward to those library hours. She didn't know about Emily, didn't see me as the forgotten brother, just Jake, the guy who could run a mean play. But trouble followed me too. Tyler Evans had it out for me worse than ever after that game. He's a senior too, built like a tank, with a buzz cut and a smirk that makes you want to punch him. He'd always toss jabs my way, calling me emo or mama's boy, but now it was personal. "Heard your folks didn't even clap for you, Carter," he taunted in the hall one day, his buddies snickering behind him. I clenched my fists, heat rising in my chest, a wildfire spreading under my skin, but I walked past, jaw tight, refusing to give him the fight he wanted. Then, at practice, he took it further. We were scrimmaging, the field muddy from last night's rain, my breath puffing white in the cold air. I'd just caught a short pass, turning to run, when the whistle blew, play dead. I slowed, and that's when Tyler hit me late, hard, his shoulder slamming into my ribs like a battering ram. I went down, gasping, pain blooming sharp and bright, a white-hot spike that stole my air. I curled on the ground, clutching my side, the taste of dirt and blood in my mouth as the crowd's cheers faded to a dull buzz. Coach Riley was on him in seconds, his roar cutting through the haze. "Evans, you're out. Sit your ass down." Tyler stormed off, his cleats kicking up clumps of mud, but not before leaning close and muttering, "Cry to your sister about it." His words stung worse than the hit, a knife twisting in an old wound. I dragged myself up, ribs screaming, and spat into the grass, my hands trembling with rage and something else. Shame, maybe, that he'd found the soft spot I couldn't armor. Coach jogged over, his face red with fury but his eyes steady on me. "You good, Carter?" he asked, voice gruff but low, like he didn't want the team to hear. I nodded, wincing as I straightened, the pain a dull throb now. "Yeah, just winded." He clapped my shoulder, firm but careful. "Dirty play. He's benched for the week." "You're tougher than that hit, kid." I forced a half smile, but inside I was reeling, Tyler's words echoing louder than the impact. Maggie was there when I limped off the field, her sneakers squeaking on the wet pavement as she ran up. "That asshole," she hissed, her blonde ponytail whipping as she glared at Tyler's retreating back. She shoved a water bottle into my hands, her hazel eyes blazing. "You okay?" "I swear I'll key his stupid truck myself." I took a swig, the cold water grounding me, and chuckled despite the ache. "I'm fine, Mags. Bruised, not broken." She didn't buy it, crossing her arms. "He's jealous, Jake. You're good, better than him, and he knows it. Don't let him get in your head." I wanted to believe her, but Tyler's jab about Emily stuck, a splinter I couldn't pull out. Sophia Ramirez found me later, her quiet steps a contrast to Maggie's storm. We'd been meeting up more since that history project, her dark eyes always catching mine across the library table, her voice soft but sure when she talked about books or her brother's soccer games. She appeared by the bleachers, a worn paperback tucked under her arm, her brow furrowed. "I heard what happened at practice," she said, hesitating like she wasn't sure she should be there. "You sure you're all right? That looked bad." I leaned against the metal, the cold biting through my jacket, and shrugged. "I've had worse. Thanks, though." She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "You don't have to pretend with me, Jake. I saw how hard he hit you." Her concern was gentle, unguarded, and it threw me. Nobody but Maggie and Grandma ever dug past my surface like that. I swallowed, my throat tight. "It's not the hit that hurts," I admitted, voice low. She nodded, like she understood more than I'd said, and stayed there, a quiet anchor in the chaos. Tyler didn't let up. The next day, he cornered me in the parking lot, his truck idling behind him, exhaust curling in the crisp air. "You're such a martyr, Carter," he sneered, his breath fogging. "Poor Jake, nobody loves him 'cause his sister's a cripple." My blood boiled, and I stepped forward, fists balled, ready to swing. But then Mr. Harris, the janitor, a wiry guy with a limp and a perpetual cigarette, rolled up with his cart, whistling off-key. "Cut it out, Evans," he barked, his voice raspy from years of smoke. "I ain't mopping blood off my asphalt today." Tyler smirked but backed off, tossing a whatever over his shoulder as he climbed into his truck. Mr. Harris gave me a nod, his gray eyes sharp. "Don't let punks like that drag you down, kid. Seen too many good ones fall for it." I muttered a thanks, my pulse still racing, grateful for the save but rattled by how close I'd come to losing it. Home was no refuge. Emily's fever had cleared, but her mood hadn't. She'd caught wind of my touchdown, Maggie must have blabbed, and it set her off. I walked in one night to find her in the living room, wheelchair parked by the couch, her face pinched tight like she'd sucked on a lemon. The TV flickered some reality show she liked, the volume low, but her eyes were locked on me, sharp and accusing. "Heard you're a big shot now," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a shard of glass. "Guess you don't need us anymore." I froze, my backpack slipping off my shoulder, thudding to the floor as her words slammed into me, heavy and hot. My stomach twisted, guilt and anger tangling like wires in my gut. "It's not like that, Em," I said, my voice softer than I meant, trying to smooth the edge she'd sharpened. She rolled her eyes, a quick flick that stung more than it should have. "Right. You're out there playing hero while I'm stuck here." Her tone dripped with bitterness, and I felt it seep into me, a cold ache I couldn't shake. Mom rushed in from the kitchen, her nurse scrubs wrinkled, her hands wringing like she was trying to squeeze out her own worry. "Emily, honey, don't. He's just doing his thing," she said, her voice high and pleading, darting a glance at me like I'd back her up. But Emily wheeled away, the hum of her chair loud in the silence, muttering, "Whatever," as she disappeared down the hall. I stood there, rooted, the air thick with her resentment and Mom's fluster. Dad came home later, his tie loose, his face etched with the day's exhaustion. He clapped my shoulder absently, a half-hearted gesture that barely registered. "Good game, Jake," he said, but his eyes were already on Emily's closed door, his mind somewhere else. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, the taste bitter, and retreated to my room. The walls closed in, the ceiling pressing down, and I flopped onto my bed, staring at the chipped paint, wondering how I'd become the villain in my own house. The next day, I met Lila Morris at school. She's a junior, a wiry girl with dyed purple hair and a camera always slung around her neck, part of the yearbook crew. She'd been at the game, snapping shots from the sidelines, and cornered me in the cafeteria, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. "Carter, that touchdown was epic," she said, grinning, her braces glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Got it on film, front page material." I blinked, caught off guard by her enthusiasm. Thanks," I mumbled, poking at my lukewarm fries. She plopped down across from me, uninvited but undeterred. "Seriously, you're like the underdog story we need. What's your deal?" Her energy was relentless, and I shrugged, not sure how to answer. "Just playing ball," I said, but she leaned in, eyes bright. "Nah, there's more, I can tell. You're hiding a saga, I'm calling it now." I laughed despite myself, her weird intensity cracking through my gloom, and we ended up talking. About football, her photography, how she wanted to ditch this town someday. She didn't know about Emily, and I didn't tell her, but her chatter was a lifeline, pulling me out of the pit for a minute. Tyler wasn't done with me, though. He caught me after practice a few days later, the sky bruising purple with dusk, the field still damp from an afternoon drizzle. I was lacing up my sneakers by the bleachers when he loomed up, his shadow swallowing the fading light. "Still riding that one touchdown, huh, Carter?" he sneered, his voice gravelly, his buddies hovering a few steps back like vultures. "Bet your folks didn't even notice. Too busy with the gimp." My chest ignited, a flare of rage so hot I could taste it, metallic and raw. I stood, fists clenched, ready to swing, when Mr. Harris, the janitor with the limp and the ever-present cigarette, rolled by with his cart, the wheels rattling. "Knock it off, Evans," he rasped, flicking ash onto the pavement. "I ain't hosing down this lot 'cause you're a dumbass." Tyler smirked, but his eyes flickered, and he backed off, tossing a later loser over his shoulder. Mr. Harris gave me a nod, his weathered face unreadable. "Keep your head up, kid. Punks like that ain't worth the dirt they kick." I exhaled, shaky, and muttered, "Thanks," as he shuffled off, the moment leaving me rattled but intact. Emily's mood festered like a storm cloud over the house. She'd stopped talking to me directly, her silence a weapon sharper than her words. I'd catch her glaring from her chair, her fingers tight on the armrests, while Mom fluttered around, trying to smooth things over. "She's just adjusting, Jake," Mom said one morning, her voice strained as she poured coffee, the pot trembling in her hand. "She's not used to you being busy." I stared at her, the mug hot in my palms, and wanted to yell, adjusting to what? Me existing? But I just nodded, the fight draining out of me. Dad was worse, buried in work, coming home late with half-hearted, "How's it going, champ?" So that felt like afterthoughts. I started eating in my room, headphones on, drowning out the hum of Emily's chair and Mom's apologies with music that thumped loud enough to numb me. Sophia noticed the shift. We'd been meeting in the library more, her quiet presence a balm to the chaos. One afternoon, she slid a note across the table. Neat handwriting, a sketch of a football in the corner. "You've been off," it read. I looked up, her dark eyes searching mine, and sighed. "Family stuff," I said, keeping it vague. She tilted her head, her hair spilling over one shoulder. "You don't have to tell me, but I'm here. You're not as invisible as you think." Her words hit soft but deep, a ripple through the murk, and I managed a small smile. "Thanks, Sophia." She nodded, flipping open her book, but stayed close, her elbow brushing mine as we worked, a silent tether I didn't know I needed. Grandma Ruth was my sanctuary through it all. I'd bike over after school, the air sharp with fall, leaves crunching under my tires as I pulled into her driveway. Her house was small, weathered, but it smelled like home, cinnamon and old books, a warmth that wrapped around me. She was sicker now, her cancer gnawing at her strength, but she still shuffled to the kitchen when I arrived, her gray hair loose, her smile faint but real. "My champion's back," she said that week, her voice a rasp as she set out her recipe book, its pages curling at the edges. We made oatmeal raisin cookies, my favorite, and I spilled it all, the touchdown, Emily's venom, how Mom and Dad didn't show. She listened, her hands shaky as she scooped dough, her eyes sharp despite the fatigue. "They're missing your shine, Jake," she said, sliding the tray into the oven. "Don't let it fade for them." She pulled out Grandpa's old silver whistle then, scratched and worn, and pressed it into my hand. "For my star," she whispered, and I hugged her tight, her frame so frail it scared me, my throat burning with unshed tears. She was slipping, and I couldn't hold her here. Then came the collapse. It was a Saturday, the sky heavy with gray, the air thick with coming rain, pressing down like a wet blanket over the world. I'd biked to Grandma Ruth's house after a rough week, my legs pumping hard to outrun the storm brewing inside me, Emily's latest tantrum, Tyler's relentless jabs, the way Mom and Dad's voices faded when I spoke. Her street was quiet, the usual hum of lawnmowers and kids playing swallowed by the gloom. I propped my bike against the porch, the familiar creak of the wooden steps under my sneakers grounding me as I pushed open the door. "Grandma?" I called, my voice echoing in the stillness. No answer, just the faint tick of her old clock and a sharp, bitter smell. Burnt tea, maybe. I stepped into the kitchen, and there she was, sprawled on the linoleum, her breathing shallow, a mug of tea shattered beside her, the brown liquid pooling like blood around the broken shards. My heart stopped, a cold fist squeezing my chest as I dropped to my knees, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped my phone. "Please hurry," I choked into the 911 call, my voice breaking, splintering like the mug as I fumbled to hold her cold fingers, her pulse faint and fluttering under my touch, a fragile thread I couldn't lose. "Grandma, stay with me," I begged, tears blurring her pale face, her gray hair splayed across the floor like a halo as the sirens wailed closer, their scream cutting through the haze. The ambulance screeched into the driveway, red lights flashing through the windows, painting the walls in frantic streaks. I rode with her, crammed in the back, the paramedics' voices a frantic hum, pulses weak. "Get the oxygen," as I gripped her hand, her skin papery and cool, whispering, "You're okay, you're okay," over and over, a lie I clung to like a lifeline, my throat raw with it. Her chest barely moved under the blanket they'd thrown over her, and I watched, helpless, my breath hitching with every jolt of the siren. At the hospital, they wheeled her away, the gurney's wheels rattling down the hall, and I stood there, alone in the sterile lobby, the antiseptic smell burning my nose, my hands still trembling with the ghost of her touch. Mom and Dad arrived 20 minutes later, their faces pale, drawn tight with worry, finally there, but for her, not me. Mom's scrubs were wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and Dad's tie hung crooked, his eyes bloodshot from a late shift. "Where is she?" Mom asked, her voice sharp, not even glancing my way as she rushed to the desk. Dad put a hand on my shoulder, brief and heavy, but his gaze followed her, and I was left standing there, a shadow in their panic. We sat in the waiting room, the clock's tick slicing through the silence, each one a knife carving deeper into my chest. The chairs were hard, the air cold, and I hugged my jacket tighter, Grandma's whistle digging into my thigh through my pocket. Mom paced, her sneakers squeaking on the tile, muttering, "She's tough, she'll pull through," like she could will it true. Dad slumped beside me, staring at the floor, his hands clasped so tight his knuckles whitened. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck, a lump I couldn't swallow. Then the doctor stepped out, a thin man with glasses and a flat voice that hit like a hammer. "We did all we could." The air sucked out of the room, Mom's gasp a ragged sound as she sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. Dad's head dropped, a low groan escaping him, and I bolted outside, the cold slapping my face as I gasped, tears streaming, the world tilting under my feet, a dizzy spiral I couldn't stop. Mom reached for me, her sob catching, "Jake, honey." But I pulled away, too raw, too shattered to let her in. Grandma was gone, and the hole she left was a chasm, dark and endless, swallowing everything I'd held on to. I stumbled to the parking lot, the rain starting now, fat drops splattering my hoodie, soaking through to my skin. I leaned against a lamppost, my breath hitching, the cold metal biting into my back as I tried to piece myself together. That's when Nate Thompson found me. He's a sophomore, a wiry kid with freckles and a mop of red hair, one of the water boys for the football team. He'd been at the hospital visiting his mom, she works in the cafeteria, and spotted me through the glass doors. "Carter?" he called, jogging over, his sneakers splashing in puddles. "You okay, man? You look like hell." I wiped my face, rain mixing with tears, and shook my head. Grandma, she didn't make it. His eyes widened, and he shoved his hands in his pockets, awkward but there. Shit, that sucks. I'm sorry. She was cool. Brought cookies to the games once, right? I nodded, a flicker of her smile cutting through the fog, and he stayed, kicking at the wet asphalt. If you need anything, like, I don't know, a ride or whatever, I'm around. His offer was clumsy, but it anchored me, a small thread of light in the dark. Inside, the aftermath was a blur. Mom and Dad handled the paperwork, their voices low and strained, while I sat in a corner, staring at the whistle in my hands, its scratches glinting under the fluorescent lights. A nurse, Ms. Carter, no relation, a round woman with kind eyes, brought me a cup of lukewarm coffee. "You're Ruth's grandson, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft as she sat beside me. "She talked about you all the time, her Jake, the football star." I looked up, surprised, my throat tightening. "She did?" Ms. Carter nodded, patting my knee. "Said you were her pride. Don't you forget that, hear?" Her words were a balm, stitching up a piece of me, and I clung to them as Mom called me over, her face streaked with mascara, to head home. The house felt wrong without Grandma's presence hovering in the background. Emily was quiet for once, parked by the window, staring at the rain, her hands limp in her lap. "She's really gone?" she asked, her voice small, and I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Mom tried to cook dinner, burnt macaroni, the smoke alarm shrieking, but we barely ate, the silence heavy, broken only by Dad's occasional cough. I retreated to my room, curling up with Grandma's letter. "Live your life, Jake." Not theirs, and read it until the words blurred, a promise I wasn't sure I could keep yet. Grandpa Jack fell apart after that. He'd always been the quiet one, his model trains clacking in the basement while Grandma filled the house with noise, but now he was a ghost. He sold their place a month later, the for sale sign a punch to my gut as I biked past, the porch empty, the windows dark. He moved to a nursing home an hour away, and I visited once, the antiseptic smell choking me, his room bare except for a photo of them, young laughing, a world I'd never know. "You holding up, kid?" he asked, his voice thin, his hands trembling as he handed me the whistle back. She'd left it with him for me. "Trying," I said, clutching it, the metal warm now from his grip. He nodded, staring out the window at nothing, and I left, the silence between us a shared ache, a tether to what we'd lost. School was a minefield. Tyler pounced the next week, his voice booming across the cafeteria. "No more granny hugs for Carter, huh?" he taunted, his tray slamming down as heads turned. I surged up, fury blinding me, my chair scraping loud, but Lila Morris, purple hair, camera swinging, jumped in, her small frame a wall. "Shut it, Evans," she snapped, her voice sharp as she held up her camera. "I've got your ugly mug on film. Want it in the yearbook?" He sneered but backed off, and she turned to me, breathless. "You good? He's a tool." I nodded, my pulse slowing, grateful for her scrappy save. Sophia caught me later by my locker, her dark eyes soft. "I heard about your grandma," she said, her voice a whisper over the hall's din. "I'm sorry." I shrugged, the grief too big for words, but she lingered, her hand brushing mine, a quiet anchor I didn't expect. Nate started hanging around more too, trailing me at practice with his water bottles, his chatter a distraction from the wait. "My mom says your grandma was the best tipper in the cafeteria," he said one day, grinning as he handed me a towel. "She'd sneak me fries sometimes." I smiled, faint but real, the memory of her sneaking through. He didn't push, just stayed, a goofy shadow I didn't mind. At home, Emily's resentment boiled over. "You're never here anymore," she'd snap, her wheelchair creaking as she rolled past, her eyes narrowed. Mom would murmur, "He's just busy, sweetie." But it didn't stop her. One night she lost it at dinner, her fork clattering on her plate, the sound jarring. "You love him more because he's normal," she screamed, tears spilling, her voice cracking the air. Dad's jaw dropped. Mom rushed to her, hands fluttering, and I sat there invisible again, the room choking with their guilt. I couldn't breathe in that space anymore. "We need therapy," I said the next morning, my voice flat, expecting them to laugh it off. They didn't. We started going, Dr. Ellis, a calm woman with a jungle of plants, coaxing us in her small office. I poured it out, how I felt erased, how Emily's needs buried mine. The words spilled from me like water breaking a dam, raw and unsteady, filling Dr. Ellis's small office with years of pent-up ache. Mom's eyes watered, glistening under the soft light, her hands twisting in her lap as if she could wring out the guilt. Dad shifted in his chair, his broad shoulders hunching, his jaw tight like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. For a moment, I thought they saw me, really saw me, the kid who'd been screaming silently for years. Dr. Ellis nodded, her pen poised over her notepad, her calm voice nudging us forward. "That's a start, Jake. Let's build on it." We tried. Bowling one night, me picking the lane, the clatter of pins mixing with Dad's rare chuckle as my ball veered into the gutter again and again. Another time, a movie, Mom sneaking me popcorn, her fingers brushing mine with a hesitant smile. It was clumsy, a fragile thread of hope stitching through the cracks, and I clung to it, my chest light with the possibility of something new. Emily hated it. She'd never had to share them before, and every step I took into their light felt like a theft to her. "Must be nice leaving me out," she'd mutter, her voice a blade slipping under my ribs, sharp and cold. I'd catch her glaring from her wheelchair, her fingers digging into the armrests, her lips pressed thin. Soon, she shattered. It was at dinner, the table set with Mom's half-hearted lasagna, the air thick with tension. "You don't care about me," she sobbed, her voice cracking the quiet, tears spilling down her cheeks as she shoved her plate, the clatter loud against the wood. Mom and Dad snapped back to her, their focus a tide pulling away, washing over her like I'd never spoken. Mom's arms wrapped around her, whispering, "We're here, sweetie," while Dad's eyes softened, his hand resting on her shoulder. I sat there, fork still, the lasagna cooling, my thread of hope fraying as their attention drowned me out again. Therapy became her stage. Every session, her fears and jealousy took center, her voice rising over mine, how she felt abandoned, how my normal life mocked her. Dr. Ellis tried to steer us, her calm fraying at the edges, but Emily's tears were louder than my silence. One session, she turned on me, her eyes flashing, her wheelchair creaking as she leaned forward. "He's guilting you because I'm sick. He's selfish." The accusation hit like a slap and I flinched, my chest tightening. Dad's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching. Mom whispered, "No, honey," her voice soft and soothing, but they didn't look at me, their gazes locked on her, reassuring her, erasing me. The room pulsed with their guilt, and I felt it, the same old weight, the same old shadow. I stood, my chair scraping loud, my voice trembling but clear. "I've begged you to see me. You won't. I'm done." The room froze. Mom's gasp a sharp intake, Dad's shock widening his eyes, Emily's stare wide and unblinking. Ellis reached out. "Jake, wait." But I walked out, my heart pounding, a strange peace settling in my bones. I was done chasing shadows, done pleading for a spotlight that had never turned my way. The days after were quiet, a slow unraveling. I pulled back, not out of anger but exhaustion, my energy spent on a fight I couldn't win. Mom noticed, her voice tentative over breakfast. "How's school, Jake?" But her eyes darted to Emily's door, her focus split. Dad tried too, awkward claps on my back. "Good practice today?" But the words hung empty, his mind elsewhere. Emily felt it too, her mood swinging between smug and confused. "You're so quiet now," she'd say, probing, her tone half accusing, half curious. But I'd shrug, "Just busy," and leave it there. We were strangers under the same roof, orbiting separate worlds, and I let the distance grow, a shield I built brick by brick. School became my lifeline. Coach Riley doubled down, his gruff voice barking drills, "Carter, move your ass, you're all state material." And I threw myself into it, the sweat and burn of practice drowning out the quiet at home. Maggie stuck close, her fire unwavering, dragging me to diner hangouts, her laughter loud over greasy fries. "You're killing it, Jake," she'd say, punching my arm, her grin a spark that kept me going. Sophia stayed too, her quiet steadiness a contrast, library sessions stretching late, her soft, "You're enough," cutting through my doubt. Lila popped up more, her camera clicking, her chatter about yearbook spreads. "You're my star, Carter," a quirky boost I didn't expect. Even Nate hovered, his goofy grin and water bottles a constant at practice, his "You're tough, man," a small echo of Grandma's pride. Tyler shifted too. After that cafeteria clash, he caught me by the bleachers one dusk, the air cool, the field empty. "My brother's a junkie," he muttered, kicking dirt, his buzz cut catching the fading light. "Folks picked him every time. I get it, okay?" I nodded, stunned, the truth settling between us like dust after a storm. He started nodding back at practice, a gruff, nice catch slipping out once, and I took it, a crack in the wall we'd built. I focused on escape. College apps piled up, my grades sharp, my eyes on a scholarship, football, a ticket out. Coach Riley pushed, "You've got this, Carter." His faith a roar in my ears, and when the letter came, full ride 2 states away, I felt the ground shift, solid under me for once. I packed light, my room a shell of posters and old cleats, and left a note on the kitchen table. "I'm not mad, I need this. Take care." Mom called after me as I stepped out. "Jake, wait," her voice cracking, but I kept walking, the door clicking shut. Emily watched from her window, her face pale, and I wondered if she felt the rift widen. I didn't look back. College was a deep breath, dorm life, new air, no hum of Emily's chair or Mom's apologies. I joined the team, found my rhythm, the field a space where I wasn't a footnote. Maggie showed up too, her grin lighting the quad. "We made it, Carter." And Sophia visited, her quiet smile a tether across miles. Lila sent yearbook proofs, my touchdown photo front and center, and Nate texted dumb memes, keeping the thread alive. Tyler even messaged once, "Don't suck, Carter," and I smirked, the past loosening its grip. One night Maggie threw me a birthday party, cake, balloons, a signed football from Tyler crashing the scene. I stood there surrounded, laughter ringing, and felt it. I wasn't invisible, not here, not to them. I called home sometimes, duty more than want. Mom and Dad asked about school, their voices polite, but Emily's updates, her health, her struggles, always took over. "Glad she's okay," I'd say, hanging up, the distance a balm, not a wound. I didn't hate them anymore, didn't resent her. They'd done their best, stretched thin, and it hadn't been enough for me. So I built my own, friends who saw me, a life that fit. Christmas came and I went back once, the house unchanged, pine and antiseptic, Emily's gifts piled high. I got nothing, just sat there, empty-handed, but it didn't sting. I'd outgrown needing their light. I left early, no fuss, a quiet goodbye, and drove back to my world, the road ahead mine. Now, standing on the field under stadium lights, the crowd's roar a pulse in my veins. I feel it. I'm Jake Carter, not a shadow, not an afterthought. Grandma's whistle hangs around my neck, her words in my bones. Live your life. I did. I am. The lesson hit hard. Sometimes family isn't the blood you're born with, but the people who choose to see you, who lift you when you're down. I couldn't wait for Mom and Dad to notice, couldn't force Emily to share. I had to find my own stage, my own spotlight, and I did, through sweat, tears, and the hands that reached out when I stopped looking back. So, what about you? Ever felt invisible, stuck in someone else's story? How'd you break free, or are you still trying? Drop it below, let's talk. We're all carving our paths, and I'd bet yours has a twist worth hearing.